"I'm not a virgin," she said. But the Apache took her hands and replied, "I never asked you to be." She had always been told that she wasn't good enough. Growing up in her Apache community, the pressure to follow traditions was heavy, and every decision she made seemed to come with 1,000 judgments. The older women in her family would always tell her stories of how a woman should be pure, untouched, and perfect for the man who would one day call her his. But for her, that story felt impossible. Life had not been kind to her. She had experienced pain that no one could understand, and her heart had been broken too many times to count. But as she grew older, she learned that life, just like the world around her, was often harsh, unforgiving, and far from the fairy tale endings that others seemed to find. From a young age, she was told that she had to protect her honor, that her value would be diminished if she didn't keep herself pure. It was a belief deeply rooted in her family's traditions, and the elders never failed to remind her of it. But how could she, someone who had seen so much hurt, ever live up to those standards? How could she ever find peace in a world that constantly made her feel like she was less than what she should be? Her past was not something she could forget, no matter how hard she tried. She had loved before, but those relationships had never turned out the way she had hoped. They left scars on her heart, scars that no one could see, but that she felt every day. The first man she loved had promised her everything. He made her believe that their bond was unbreakable, that they could conquer anything together. But those promises were empty. He left her when she needed him the most, shattering her belief in love and loyalty. The second man came into her life like a storm. He was kind, gentle, and everything she had longed for, or so it seemed. But he too had disappeared, leaving her alone and questioning everything. Her experiences with men had been filled with disappointment and pain, and now, at this point in her life, she could no longer bear the weight of those memories. Yet, she still longed for something more. She dreamed of a love that didn't hurt, a love that accepted her for who she was, not for who she was supposed to be. But as she walked through her days, she kept her emotions locked away. She didn't let anyone in, afraid of being hurt again. She had learned the hard way that love often brought nothing but heartbreak, and the idea of being vulnerable again was too much for her to handle. One day, while walking through the village, she noticed a group of men gathered around a fire, their voices low and their faces hard with the weight of their lives. They were talking about the rancher, the one who had just moved into the area. He had come from a distant place, one filled with mountains and valleys, and he had a reputation for being a quiet, reserved man. He didn't seem to care much about the people in the village, and his presence was met with curiosity. Some spoke of him with admiration, while others were skeptical of the stranger who had come to their land. He kept to himself, rarely speaking, and when he did, his words were few, but always measured. The Apache woman had heard of him but had never spoken to him. He was a mystery, one that intrigued her in a way she didn't fully understand. That day, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, she found herself walking toward the fire where the men had gathered. She didn't know why, but something pulled her there. Maybe it was the emptiness she felt inside, or maybe it was the quiet loneliness that seemed to follow her everywhere she went. As she approached the fire, she saw the rancher sitting by himself, staring into the flames. His face was hard to read, his features stoic, but there was something in his eyes that made her pause. It wasn't a look of judgment or curiosity like the others had. Instead, it was a calmness, a quiet understanding that seemed to call out to her. She didn't know what possessed her to walk over to him. Maybe it was the feeling that she could be herself, without the weight of expectations. Or maybe it was the need to escape the voices that had always told her she wasn't enough. But whatever the reason, she found herself standing beside him, unsure of what to say. The rancher looked up at her, his eyes briefly meeting hers before he returned his gaze to the fire. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them seemed to slow, and the crackling of the fire was the only sound that filled the silence. She wasn't sure what she expected from him, but she knew it wasn't this. He didn't judge her. He didn't look at her with pity or curiosity. He simply sat there, beside her, as though her presence was as natural as the stars in the sky. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she broke the silence. Her voice was soft, barely audible above the crackling fire. "I'm not a virgin," she said, her words hanging in the air like a confession she had carried for far too long. The rancher's eyes didn't waver from the fire, but she could see the muscles in his jaw tighten ever so slightly. Her heart raced as she waited for his response. She had been told time and time again that her worth would be determined by her purity. She had been made to feel like she was broken because of her past. And now she wondered if this man too would see her as something less because of it. But to her surprise, the rancher didn't look at her with disgust or disappointment. Instead, he reached out slowly, his large calloused hands gently taking hers. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through her, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like someone cared. "I never asked you to be," he said quietly, his voice steady and calm. The simplicity of his words hit her like a wave. In that moment, everything she had carried, every judgment, every fear, seemed to melt away. She had expected rejection, but instead he offered her understanding. He didn't care about her past. He didn't care about what others thought. He accepted her for who she was in that moment, and that was enough. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her past begin to lift. She didn't need to be perfect for him. She didn't need to hide who she was or what she had been through. The rancher, and that simple act of kindness, had shown her something she had never known. There was love that didn't ask for anything, a love that simply accepted. And in that moment she realized that she was not defined by her past. She was not defined by the choices she had made or the pain she had experienced. She was defined by who she was in that moment, and that was enough. The days following that evening by the fire felt like they stretched on forever. Each time she thought of the rancher's words, "I never asked you to be," something inside of her softened. For so long, she had believed that her past would be the thing that defined her forever. But now, standing in the midst of her quiet village, surrounded by familiar faces, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she could let go of the weight that had held her down for so long. It was as though his acceptance had cracked open something inside her that she didn't even know existed. She had always been a woman who kept her distance from others. The walls she had built around herself were high and strong, built from years of hurt and disappointment. No one had ever made her feel safe enough to let those walls fall, not fully. But the rancher, he didn't ask her to explain herself or offer excuses. He didn't look at her as if she owed him some version of perfection. He simply accepted her as she was. It was a rare gift, one that she wasn't sure how to handle. Yet it was one that she couldn't help but treasure. As the days went by, the rancher's presence seemed to linger in the air. She would catch glimpses of him around the village, always with his steady gaze and silent demeanor. He never sought attention, and somehow, that made him stand out more than anyone else. There was a calmness to him, an ease that she envied. Most people, especially the men in her village, wore their emotions on their sleeves, often loud and boastful. But the rancher was different. He didn't need to say much, yet there was something about the way he moved, the way he listened, that made others pay attention. It was as if he understood the power of silence, and she found herself drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. One afternoon, as she was walking through the village square, she saw him standing by the old well. His back was turned, and his gaze was fixed on something far beyond the horizon. There was a sense of solitude in the way he stood, as if he, too, had his own battles that no one could see. The thought of approaching him made her nervous, but something inside her urged her forward. She needed to talk to him, to understand what it was that made him so different from everyone else. As she neared him, her footsteps seemed to echo louder in her ears. When he turned and saw her, his face softened slightly, and he nodded in greeting. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say, but the words came to her before she could stop them. "I've been thinking about what you said," she said quietly, looking down at the ground as she spoke. She felt her heart race, and her palms grew sweaty. It wasn't easy to admit vulnerability, not even to herself, but she had to try. He didn't say anything at first. He simply waited, as if giving her the time she needed to find her words. She could feel the pressure of his gaze, but it wasn't harsh. It was patient understanding. I don't know what to do with it, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. What you said, it was kind, but I don't know how to believe it. I've spent so many years thinking that I wasn't good enough, thinking that my past would always define me. It's hard to let go of that.
The rancher didn't interrupt.
He let her speak, letting the silence between them grow, but in a way that felt comforting, not uncomfortable.
After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice steady and low.
It's hard to let go of the past, he said, his words simple but carrying a weight of truth. But you don't have to carry it forever. What's in the past is behind you. It doesn't need to follow you everywhere you go unless you let it. His words struck her deeply. She had always believed that her past was something she would carry with her for the rest of her life, a burden that would never let go. But he was right. It didn't have to define her. She could choose to leave it behind. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't something that could be done overnight. But in that moment, she realized that maybe there was a chance for something different. Maybe, just maybe, there was a future where she wasn't weighed down by her past. They stood there in silence for a few moments, and she felt the weight on her chest lighten just a little. The rancher wasn't offering solutions or telling her what to do. He wasn't telling her to forget or to move on. He was simply offering a different perspective, one that allowed her to see that she wasn't bound by what had happened before. She could choose a different path. In the days that followed, their interactions became more frequent. Sometimes it was a brief exchange of words, a casual greeting as she passed him by. Other times they found themselves talking longer, sharing stories of their lives, their pasts, their hopes. She found herself confiding in him in a way she had never done with anyone else. There was something about him that made her feel safe, like she could be herself without the fear of judgment or rejection. It wasn't that he was perfect. Far from it. He had his own struggles, his own past that he kept hidden away. But with him it didn't matter. He wasn't trying to fix her, and he wasn't expecting her to be someone she wasn't. He accepted her flaws, her mistakes, her history, and that was something she had never experienced before. It wasn't long before the bond between them began to grow stronger. She found herself thinking about him when they weren't together, wondering how he spent his days, what his life had been like before he came to the village. There was so much she didn't know about him, but she knew one thing for sure. He had a way of making her feel seen, like she was more than just her past. He had a way of making her feel like she mattered. One evening after a long day of work, she found herself walking down the same path she had taken before, heading towards the well. She didn't know why she was drawn to it again, but there he was, standing just as he had before. This time, she didn't hesitate. She walked up to him, her heart pounding in her chest, and without thinking, she spoke the words that had been building up inside her. "You've made me believe in something I didn't think was possible," she said, her voice shaky but sincere. "You've made me believe that I'm worth something, even with all my flaws, even with everything I've been through." He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze softening, and then he did something that made her heart race. He reached out, gently taking her hands in his, just as he had done the first time they had spoken. And this time, when he looked into her eyes, he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than any words could have. She felt his understanding, his acceptance, and it was enough. In that simple gesture, she felt a shift within herself. The walls she had built around her heart weren't completely gone, but they were starting to crumble. For the first time in years, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a future for her, one where she didn't have to carry the burden of her past anymore. And with him by her side, maybe she could find the strength to move forward, step by step. The days continued to pass slowly, and with each new dawn she felt a shift in herself, a quiet transformation that she wasn't sure how to explain. She still didn't have all the answers, but something about being around the rancher made her feel as though she didn't need to have them all. There was a calm in his presence, a way he carried himself that made her feel like it was okay to just be. She didn't have to be perfect. She didn't have to be who others expected her to be, and most importantly, she didn't have to hide her past from him. Every time they spoke, whether it was for only a few minutes or longer, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. It was like being in the stillness of the early morning, when the world was quiet and everything felt at rest. The rancher didn't push her to talk about things she wasn't ready to share. He simply listened, his steady gaze showing her that he was truly there and that he wasn't going anywhere. That alone gave her a sense of comfort she couldn't explain. One evening, after a long day of work, she found herself walking towards the well again. It had become a place where she and the rancher met often, though neither of them had planned it that way. The day had been particularly difficult, and the familiar heaviness in her chest seemed to have returned. She had felt it creeping up on her all day, a reminder of the weight she carried, one that she wasn't sure how to shake off. It wasn't the rancher's fault, but something about the quietness of his company made her think that maybe, just maybe, she could learn to let go of the burden. When she saw him standing there as usual by the well, she felt the old tension in her chest loosen a little. He was staring out at the horizon, his face impassive, but there was something in his posture that made her want to walk towards him. She didn't know if it was his quiet strength or the fact that he had never once made her feel like she had to explain herself, but he had a way of drawing her in. It was as if being near him made the world feel a little less heavy. She approached him slowly, unsure of what to say. For some reason it felt like everything she had been holding back was bubbling up inside her, and she didn't know if she could stop it. But as she got closer, he turned and looked at her, his expression softening when he saw her. He didn't ask her what was wrong, didn't ask her to explain anything. He simply waited. Without thinking, she spoke, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I don't know how to do this," she said, her voice shaky. "I don't know how to let go of everything I've carried. It's like it's always there, following me no matter where I go. I keep trying to move forward, but it feels like I'm stuck."
The rancher didn't say anything at first?
He just stepped closer, and in that quiet way of his, he took her hands gently in his. His touch was warm, comforting, and for a moment, she felt the weight on her chest lighten. She looked up at him, and he met her gaze without hesitation, his eyes full of understanding. "You don't have to let go all at once," he said softly. "You can take it one step at a time. You don't have to do it alone." She had always thought that to move forward she needed to completely erase her past, to bury it deep where no one could see it. But here was someone telling her that it didn't have to be that way, that she didn't have to rush, and that she didn't have to carry it all by herself. It was such a simple truth, yet it felt like a revelation to her. "I don't know how to move past it," she admitted, her voice small. "It feels like every time I think I'm ready to move forward, the past just grabs hold of me again." The rancher nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "It's not about forgetting," he said. "It's about accepting that it's part of you. It's a part of who you are, but it doesn't have to define everything about you. You can choose how it shapes you from here on out." She thought about his words for a long time. It was so different from everything she had been taught, everything she had believed for most of her life. She had always been told that her past was something to be ashamed of, that she had to hide it away, that it would always make her less than someone who had never experienced pain. But the rancher's words made her realize that she didn't have to run from it. She could accept it, let it be a part of her, but it didn't have to control her. She didn't have to be defined by the mistakes and hurts of her past. She could choose to move forward, and the choice was hers to make. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the weight of the moment. She felt something inside her shift, a small change, but one that felt significant. It wasn't like everything was suddenly clear, like all her fears and doubts had disappeared. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could start to let go of the things that had been holding her back. Maybe she could begin to believe that she was more than her past. She squeezed his hands gently, her grip firm and steady. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I would do without you." Instead, he gave her a quiet smile, one that didn't need any explanation. It was a smile that said everything she needed to hear. It was a smile that made her feel understood, seen, and most importantly, accepted. In the days that followed, something shifted in her. It wasn't an instant change, but she began to feel more at peace with herself. She started to see the beauty in the small things again, the sound of the birds in the morning, the warmth of the sun on her face, the way the earth smelled after a rainstorm. She began to feel more present in her own life, and for the first time in years she didn't feel like she was constantly running from something. She was no longer afraid to look at her past, to acknowledge it for what it was, and to move forward with it as part of her story, not something that would define her every step. And as she spent more time with the rancher, she realized that she didn't need to have everything figured out. She didn't need to have all the answers. All she needed to do was take it one day at a time, and with each step, she would find her way. And the rancher, in his quiet strength and unwavering support, had shown her that it was possible. The days seemed to blend into one another as the seasons shifted slowly around them. Each new day felt like a small victory for her, a step further from the past that had weighed her down for so long. The more time she spent with the rancher, the more she realized just how much his presence had begun to change her. He wasn't a man of many words, but in the quiet moments they shared, he spoke volumes. He didn't try to fix her, nor did he expect her to be someone she wasn't. He simply allowed her to be, offering her space and understanding when she needed it most. It was a gift that she had never known she needed, and it slowly began to heal the parts of her heart that had been broken for years. Every conversation they had was filled with a quiet sincerity, something she hadn't known she was missing in her life. They spoke about everything and nothing, about the land, about the simple joys of life, and about the things that scared them, even if those things were hard to admit. There were moments when she could feel the old wounds from her past starting to open again, but with the rancher by her side, they didn't feel as overwhelming. He didn't judge her for the pain she carried. He simply acknowledged it, and that acknowledgement was enough to start the healing process. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she noticed how easily they had fallen into a rhythm together. It was as if the weight of their pasts had slowly been lifted by the warmth of the fire and the simplicity of their shared moments. He had been telling her stories of his past, stories of a life filled with hardships and challenges. Yet there was no bitterness in his voice, no regret in his eyes. He spoke of those times with a quiet acceptance, as though they were part of him, but not the whole of him. She realized then that this was the lesson he had been trying to teach her all along. Her past was a part of her, yes, but it didn't define her. She could choose how she moved forward. She had spent so many years running from the parts of her life that she wasn't proud of, hiding them away in the deepest corners of her heart. But with him, she felt as though it was finally safe to bring those parts of herself into the light. She didn't have to be ashamed of the mistakes she had made or the pain she had endured. The rancher had shown her that it was possible to accept the past, to honor it for what it had taught her, but to also let it go, to stop letting it control her every move. And in that acceptance, there was freedom. The next few weeks felt like a slow, steady unfolding. Each day she grew a little stronger, a little more certain of herself. The doubts that had plagued her for so long started to fade into the background, and she began to see herself through different eyes. She was no longer defined by her past. She was more than just the mistakes she had made. She was a woman who had learned from her experiences, a woman who had the power to move forward, no matter how difficult it seemed. It wasn't always easy. There were days when the weight of her past seemed to press on her chest, when the memories threatened to resurface, demanding to be seen and heard. But each time that happened, she remembered the rancher's words, the quiet strength in his voice, and it gave her the courage to face those memories without fear. She didn't need to run from them anymore. She didn't need to bury them deep inside herself. She could stand tall, knowing that they were just a part of who she was, and they no longer held the power to break her. As she spent more time with him, she began to realize just how much she had been holding back in her life. She had always been afraid to trust, afraid to open her heart. But the rancher had shown her a different way. He didn't demand anything from her. He didn't expect her to be someone she wasn't. He simply accepted her just as she was. And in that acceptance, she found the strength to let her guard down. She found the courage to trust again, to believe that there were still good things left in the world, even after all the pain she had experienced.
One afternoon, as they worked together on the land, she found herself thinking about the future.
She had always been afraid of what lay ahead, afraid of the unknown. But with him by her side, she began to see a future filled with possibilities. She didn't know exactly what that future would look like, but for the first time in a long time she was no longer afraid to face it. She was ready to take the next step, to move forward with the rancher at her side, knowing that whatever came their way, they could face it together. The more time they spent together, the more she realized just how much he had changed her. She had been so closed off for so long, so afraid of being hurt again. But the rancher had shown her that it was possible to love again, to trust again, without fear. His quiet presence had given her the space to heal, and his unwavering support had given her the strength to move forward. She no longer felt like she was defined by her past. She was no longer bound by the mistakes she had made. She was free to choose her own path, free to write her own story. And with him she knew that anything was possible. As they stood together by the edge of the land, watching the sunset in the distance, she realized that she had come a long way. She wasn't the same woman she had been when they first met. She was stronger, more confident, and more at peace with herself. And it was all because of him, because of the way he had accepted her just as she was, without asking her to change or be anything other than herself. She had found something in him that she hadn't known she was looking for, a love that didn't ask for perfection, a love that simply allowed her to be. The future still felt uncertain, but she was no longer afraid of it. With the rancher by her side, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. She didn't need to know all the answers. She didn't need to have everything figured out. All she needed was the courage to keep moving forward, one step at a time, knowing that with him, she would never have to face anything alone. And for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. The world felt different now, quieter, as though the weight of her past had finally been lifted. She could still hear the echoes of those days, the whispers of doubt and fear that had plagued her for so long. But now they felt distant. With every passing day, the rancher's presence beside her seemed to ground her more in the present, and she felt stronger than she had ever felt before. She was no longer a prisoner of her past, no longer bound by the mistakes she had made or the pain she had endured. For the first time in a long time, she could see herself clearly, not through the lens of regret or shame, but as someone worthy of love and happiness. She had come to realize that the future was not something to fear. It wasn't something that she had to wait for, something that would come to her when she was ready. It was something she could shape with her own hands, one decision at a time. And with the rancher by her side, she no longer felt alone in facing the unknown. He had taught her that the past didn't define who she was, and the future didn't need to be something she feared. The only thing that mattered was the present moment, and in this moment, she was ready to embrace everything that life had to offer. The quiet moments they shared together, walking side by side along the land, had become some of her most cherished memories. The rancher didn't speak often, but when he did, it was with a kindness and sincerity that made her feel seen. And when he didn't speak, his presence alone was enough. It was a peaceful silence, one that didn't need to be filled with words. It was the kind of silence that felt comforting, like the stillness of the night when the world was asleep, and everything was at rest. But even in this peaceful silence, there was a growing sense of something deeper between them. It was not something she could put into words, but it was there, a connection that felt almost unspoken, yet understood in every glance they shared. It was a bond that had been forged not in grand gestures, but in the quiet moments of acceptance and trust. In the small ways he showed her that she was enough, just as she was, without needing to prove anything to anyone. The rancher had never tried to change her. He had never asked her to be anyone other than herself. He had simply allowed her to be, and that had been enough. As the days turned into weeks, she found herself thinking about the future more and more. She didn't know exactly what it would look like, but she knew that she was ready to face it. The uncertainty that had once paralyzed her now felt like an open door, inviting her to walk through it without hesitation. She had spent so much of her life waiting for things to change, for the perfect moment to arrive, but she had come to realize that there was no perfect moment. The moment to begin was now, and she was ready. One evening, as they sat together by the fire watching the stars twinkle above them, she felt a quiet peace settle over her. The warmth of the fire, The quiet rustle of the trees and the soft hum of the night around them made everything feel right. She turned to the rancher, her heart full of gratitude for the quiet strength he had shown her. He had given her the space to heal, the time to find herself again. He had never rushed her, never pushed her to be something she wasn't ready to be. He had simply stood by her, patiently waiting for her to realize that she was worth more than the pain she had been carrying. "I never thought I could be this happy," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't something she had expected to say, but the words came from her heart, and she felt them deeply. "I never thought I could feel this free." The rancher looked at her, his eyes filled with understanding, and for a moment neither of them said anything. It didn't need to be said. They both knew that the journey they had been on together had changed them, that the bond they shared was something special, something neither of them had anticipated. It was a love built not on perfection, but on acceptance, on the understanding that neither of them had to be flawless to deserve happiness. It was a love that grew in the quiet moments, in the space where both of them could be exactly who they were, without fear or shame. "I'm glad you're here," he said finally, his voice quiet but steady. "I'm glad we found each other." And in that moment she realized that she didn't need anything more. She didn't need to be anyone other than the woman she was in that moment, sitting by the fire, surrounded by the warmth of the rancher's love. She had spent so many years feeling lost, trying to fit into a mold that wasn't meant for her. But now she understood that the only person she needed to be was herself, and with him, she felt more herself than she ever had before. The future no longer seemed like a distant, frightening thing. It felt like an adventure, one that she was ready to embark on with the rancher by her side. There would be challenges ahead, of course. Life was never without its difficulties, but she now knew that she wasn't alone in facing them. They would face them together, hand in hand, just as they had faced everything else. With the rancher by her side, she felt ready to take on whatever came their way. As the fire burned down to embers and the night grew deeper, she rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart against hers. It was a quiet, peaceful moment, one that spoke louder than any words ever could. She was no longer the woman who had carried the weight of her past in silence. She was no longer the woman who had felt defined by her mistakes and regrets. She was a woman who had learned to accept herself, who had learned that her past did not define her, and that the future was something she could shape with every choice she made. And as the stars shone brightly above them, she realized that she had found her place in the world. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. And with the rancher by her side, she knew that it would be enough.